it's hard to stay disciplined in
Hmm.
markets. And the most successful investors I know are not people who chased hot stocks or got into Nvidia early or got into Facebook early or Amazon early. The most successful investors I know are the ones who have stayed disciplined through market volatility. And it's the number one piece of advice I would have for anybody, any family, any individual investor. Set a plan and be really disciplined in carrying out that plan, especially when it feels wrong.
Welcome to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest topic of all, money. How to make it, save it, keep it. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question, what it means to live a rich life beyond money. My guests share their practices, principles, and evergreen wisdom. I'm your host, Bogumil Baranowski, author, TEDx speaker, and investment advisor to wealth creators with patient capital and an infinite investment horizon. I work with families and individuals who aspire to grow wealth over a lifetime and generations through disciplined, thoughtful investments in durable quality businesses while giving money meaning. Join me on this quest to unearth and share the wisdom of the ages. Let me share with you the podcast program disclosure statement. Blue Infinitas Capital LLC is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by the firm's employees and podcast guests on this show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Blue Infinitas Capital. All the statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. The information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. The information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. None of what you're about to hear is investment advice. All right, my guest today is Andy Busser, the CEO of Pitcairn. For 101 years, Pitcairn has guided some of the most affluent families on their wealth journey. And today we talk about managing fortunes and guiding families over generations. Andy, how are you? So nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I want to start from the beginning. As you may know, I like to ask my guests about the early days, about childhood, upbringing, and how you think that time shaped you, your relationship with money, and the career path that you chose.
Wow, that's a great question. And it's kind of funny. I grew up with really not much money at all. My parents were both well educated and professionals, but neither of them made much money, and so we grew up very modestly. But both of my parents grew up in affluent families, and particularly my mother's family. My grandfather was a CEO who had grown up dirt poor, but built a great business, and really more importantly lived his life by a great set of values. And so he instilled those values in us. And my parents were good carriers of those values too. And so even though we didn't have much money growing up, we had a very good sense of developing high expectations, a very good sense of the importance of being curious, and a very good sense that even though we didn't have any money, we were lucky to be well educated and loved, and that we ought to play, my brothers and I, we ought to play a leadership role in life. And I think that expectation early on was just hugely valuable to me. It resonated with me as a kid, and it really made me think about how I wanted to live my life and set my sights on the future.
Well, it resonates with me on so many levels. In my family, I grew up with this idea that education is one thing that nobody can take away from you. Money can be lost, everything can be lost, but education, it's with you throughout your life. And I thought it's a very powerful investment, inheritance, however you want to call it, but it's something that has a value passed on in the families. It's beautiful. So when it comes to money, was there a feeling that there's not enough of it? There should be more of it? There was a sense of something that was lost, it could be recovered. Can you frame it a little bit for me between the two generations that you mentioned, or including you three generations, I guess?
Yeah, well, it's there was a sense there was none of it. So
None
that
of
made
it.
it very clear.
Huh?
What there was a little bit of money from my grandparents to pay for my brothers and me to go to private school. And that was an absolute godsend because, frankly, we lived in a neighborhood where the public schools were not good. And if we hadn't gone to private school, the education that you just described, we never would have gotten that. And so being able to go to a really good private school in Columbus, Ohio was a huge advantage. And sort of like my family, we didn't have any money, but I was going to school every day with kids who did have money. And more importantly, they had successful families and successful parents who set high standards for themselves and their kids. And that really, again, it resonated with me. And there was a disparity between my economic circumstances and my ambition for my life. But I got to a point later on in high school and then really in college where I saw opportunities for myself to set high standards and to take some leadership risks and leadership opportunities and turn them into something valuable for my life. I was very lucky in college that I got a number of leadership opportunities in student government, and those always felt like a good use of my time. It felt like something I enjoyed, um, and I was grateful for those opportunities. And then when I came out of school, um, I saw more leadership opportunities in the real world, and I thought, well, this feels right. This feels great. Let's go do that. And I certainly wanted some financial security as an adult, in part because we didn't have much at all growing up. And so that was important to me. But it was definitely a, always viewed financial security as a product of the way you live your life, how the risks you take, how you manage those risks, the leadership initiatives that you're willing to sacrifice yourself for. I've heard some great leaders say that being a great leader is really a function of being a great strategist and the ability to communicate and absorb pain. And I always thought that third part was so interesting because being a great strategist, well, that makes sense to almost all of us right away. You got to know the right things to do, and then being able to communicate that well to others so that they can digest it for themselves and go out and take action. That's really important. But the ability to absorb pain was one that, as soon as I heard it, it made sense. But I'd never thought of it on my own. But really, that ability to make tough decisions that other people don't want to make or aren't willing to make, and the willingness to stay up late and keep working on a project or an assignment or a client deliverable, whatever it is, until you get it just right, so that you're setting the right example for others. The willingness to have tough conversations, all those things matter a lot, and they're all great lessons that I've learned through my career. Some of which came naturally to me, and a lot of which didn't, and I just had to work on it to make it successful.
What I'm hearing is being comfortable with discomfort. I think that's where you're going with
For
that.
sure, stretching the bounds of your comfort zone is a hugely important thing for any leader, whether you're a family leader or a business leader or a political leader. Getting comfortable in a wider variety of settings with a wider variety of people who have a wider variety of interests and a wider variety of biases. All of those things are hugely important, I think.
I like the sound of that. It's related to the next question that I have, but just before that, I want to ask you, of those leadership roles that you mentioned, were they finding you or were you finding them, the early ones?
You know, it's in college. It just started by accident um, in my fraternity house, and just somebody needed to keep the place organized, and so I and a couple of my buddies, ran
I'll
for
do it.
raised our hands and ran for office, and took on some leadership roles, and then the spring of my junior year of college, somebody said, "Hey, Andy, you should run for senior class president." And I had never thought of that for a moment until my friend suggested it. And I said, geez, okay, what does that involve? Um, and he said, well, I don't know, but I think people would like you to do it, and you take initiative and get people excited about things. And I said, well, okay, let's think about that a little bit more. And I thought, well, we could do some things for the school, and we could raise some money, and of course, in college, I then thinking, hey, mostly we could have fun, and so I ran and won, and we did raise money, and we did have fun, and it was really rewarding experience for me, just to be a peer leader,
Mhm.
and to come up with ideas, and then organize them and get people excited about them, and so yeah, you could. I mean, that was just something I'd never thought of, but it did kind of find me, and then I pursued it, and then in life, in here in my professional life, I think I've always sought out a little bit more responsibility. And if I come up with an idea, I've never expected somebody else to chase it down for me. I've
Right.
known that I have to chase it down myself, and that mindset has helped me a lot.
I want to bring up something that you shared with me when we spoke, how in a way, the way I heard it was that the role that you're in, that role found you through a series of fortunate coincidences.
Well, my whole career is a case study in the importance of luck,
Uh-huh.
because a lot of people work hard. And, I worked hard, and that's fine. But I know a lot of people who work hard day in and day out, and maybe they just didn't get lucky in one way or another. And I've gotten lucky many times over in my career. A lot of it is just by raising my hand
Hmm.
and having something work out. And there are plenty of times where I've raised my hand and something hasn't worked out too. But I started my career at DuPont, working in a big company, and learning how to grow a business in a big company. Um, and that was a wonderful experience, because I just learned so much from some very talented leaders at DuPont, and they did a great job of developing young people. Um, and I really enjoyed it. But the division I was in was not going to grow. And in fact, ultimately, DuPont sold that business a few years after I left. But when I left, I got lucky again and went into management consulting, and just learned an enormous amount about strategy and about working with CEOs. I mean, I didn't know anything about either of those topics. And I learned a ton about finance and how you put pieces together, how do you get people and strategy and marketing and clients and customers and finances all together. And that was just a fabulous experience, which I'd recommend to anybody, as long as you're willing to have no life, because management consulting is a
So,
16-hour a day job,
mhm.
at least 6 days a week, often seven, and often involving a lot of travel. It's not a great way to live your full life, but it is a fabulous way to develop skills. And I got lucky there, where I worked with some terrific leaders, and at the Wilkerson Group, wonderful firm. And then I started a small spin-out consulting firm from there. Again, got lucky because a few people said, Andy, would you want to lead this effort? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And then got lucky that while doing that, we met some guys who knew a lot about private equity, and they said, "Well, we're thinking about starting a fund, and we'd love to have your consulting firm's expertise." And I said, "Great, let's do it together." And they said, "Great." And so then we formed a private equity firm and raised a fund and made investments. It was, again, an amazing experience where, just kept raising my hand and other people kept raising their hands, and we really enjoyed it and learned a lot. And one of the things we learned is we'd set up a strategy with a lot of expertise, but it was too small in many ways. And so we started questioning whether that was a viable long-term private equity firm or not. And so while we were working on that, we started a hedge fund and learned a lot doing that, and made some money doing that, which was great. And then just absolutely random chance, I had breakfast with a buddy of mine and talking about a wide range of business things. One of our clients from the consulting days was a wealthy family, and he said, "Well, you ought to help that family with a broader set of skills." And let me introduce you to my buddy 2 tables over at breakfast, who works at a family office. And I said, "Great, I've heard of a family office, but I don't really know what it is." And so we ended up hitting it off, and he said, "Yeah, you should come join Pitcairn and bring that family you work with, bring them with you." And I said, "Well, that sounds super cool, and I better go learn how a family office works." And so got just super lucky. And Pitcairn's a wonderful firm. Uh, had 90 plus years of experience then, and now we've just passed our 100th anniversary, and just an enormous amount of luck, along with hard work. But hard work's a given. It's I think the luck that has made a huge difference for me.
And you kept learning. You accepted the challenge again and again and again.
Yeah, well, I do. I love to learn. I love to ask questions. I love to read, and I love to be surrounded by really talented people who challenge me, but also who can help answer all of my questions. And so we're extremely lucky here at Pitcairn that we have a lot of talented, very knowledgeable people who love to engage in spirited discussions and deep inquiry to figure out how things can best be done. So that kind of environment is really invigorating for me.
So I want to ask about the farm, Pitcairn. It has a unique history. Maybe you can walk us through it. How did it come about? I think it's a very special tale to share with the audience.
Well, the story goes way back to the 1840s. John Pitcairn was born in Scotland in 1841, came over with his family from Scotland to the United States in the early 1850s. The family was dirt poor, and they settled in Pittsburgh. John Pitcairn had to drop out of school when he was 14 to just help support the family. And so John and his brother both got jobs with the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was just becoming a real business there in the 1850s. And John Pitcairn was a very bright kid. He wasn't well educated, but he was very smart. And he learned how to operate the telegraph, which, if you think about it, telegraph was the tech of the day, railroads and telegraphs. And so this was all speeding up communication and transportation in the 1850s and 60s. And so he was a very enterprising guy, and he took what little money he made from operating the telegraph. He took a little money and would buy up land and then try and sell it to the railroad where they were going to build tracks. And so he made a small fortune speculating in land and selling it to the railroads. And so by the time he was in his mid to late 20s, he was actually he'd done okay. And one of the things he realized in the 1860s and early 1870s was there was a lot of oil coming out of Pennsylvania and Northeast Ohio. And there was a small company then called Standard Oil in Cleveland. And they were distributing kerosene all over the place. This was before gasoline even existed. They
Right.
were refining oil into kerosene, and kerosene was this brand new thing that was a clean fuel to replace candles and whale blubber and other sources of fuel. And so John Pitcairn distributed kerosene through the Pennsylvania Railroad for Standard Oil, became very close with John Rockefeller through that process, no surprise. Um, and so by the time he was 40, he was actually a very wealthy man. And so he and his new bride, he waited a long time to get married, but he and his new bride took a grand tour of Europe around 1880. And that was a very fashionable thing to do then. And and while he was there, he found a chemist in England who had developed a new process for making plate glass. And so he thought, well, this would be amazing. You know, I've spent all this time in Pittsburgh and I've seen how Carnegie makes steel on a massive scale, and I've seen how Rockefeller has refined oil on a massive scale. I'm going to go back and build a glass business, and we're going to make plate glass on a massive scale. And plate glass up to that point was still all made in England and Germany. Very little of it was made in the United States. And so he did. He came back and he leveraged all of his knowledge in energy and transportation and manufacturing and built Pittsburgh plate glass. And a very modest man. He didn't put his name on it, but he founded Pittsburgh Plate Glass, and it is still a Fortune 500 company today called PPG Industries. And they are a huge paint and coatings and chemicals company today. And by 1900 or so, founded PPG in 1883. By 1900, PPG had two-thirds of the US plate glass market. I mean, just unbelievable success very, very quickly. And John Pitcairn died in 1916 and left his fortune to his three sons who made it to adulthood. And they were just sort of overwhelmed by the amount of wealth that they had. And they sort of managed that independently for a while. And then finally in 1923, 7 years later, they said, let's form a company to manage our wealth, to make our investments, manage our taxes, manage our insurance, manage all of our accounting, and make sure that we're doing everything the best we can. And so they did. They formed the Pitcairn Company in 1923 simply to manage their wealth. And they did a brilliant job of it. So Pitcairn here, the firm we have today was founded in 1923. We served just the Pitcairn family for 65 years. Those three sons of John Pitcairn, Raymond, Theodore, and Harold Pitcairn, all very enterprising guys on their own. They each had 9 children. So you had 27 grandchildren for John Pitcairn. And so the family office grew to be very large even by the 50s. And by the 1980s, there were literally more than 100 Pitcairn households. And so as some tax laws changed and some other things, they said, well, let's open this up to a few other families. And so they started inviting in 3 to 5 other families a year. And that is amazingly still the model today. We bring in 3 to 5 new families a year. We still maintain a full single family office service model. So when a client comes in, they really have a single family office experience here, because we certainly do investments, but we do taxes, we do trusts and estates, we serve as trustee, we do insurance, we do bill payments, we do budgeting, we do lots of accounting and CFO services, we do a lot of family engagement and personal coaching, and rising generation prep work for families. It's this wonderful business that we are so lucky to have because the Pitcairns built this thing for themselves. And we still have hundreds of Pitcairn client family members today, but more than 100 other families as well at this point.
So many thoughts here, but I'm thinking of our mutual friend who I want to bring up, Jay Hughes. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking wealth as a well-being, which he told me 1,000 times. And that's what I'm seeing. You started with the capital, the firm that grew to become a family office, that grew to become this holistic experience for families to come to. I have two questions about two decisions that happened over the last 150 years or so. One is, I understand that the original business was eventually sold. I'm curious about the timing, and correct me if I'm wrong. And the second one, the moment when the family decided to open up to other families. It's a big decision. And it looks like they went very slow about it, and they kept the pace also slow throughout time. But it's fascinating that they decided to do that.
Yeah, and actually those two events were closely related. So in 1986, the tax laws in the United States changed where you could sell low basis stock with a very low tax rate. And the idea, the government was trying to unlock a lot of trapped value in the U.S. economy. And so in 1986, the Pitcairn family decided to sell most of its holdings in PPG and have a huge liquidity event, and now a hugely diversified portfolio. And so that was a very important decision for the family office, and it dramatically expanded the investment team and all the things that we did for reporting and other things to manage a highly liquid and diversified set of assets. Going from basically one asset, PP, to now a highly diversified set of assets across equities and fixed income and real assets and hedge funds and private equity. Even back in the 80s, we were doing hedge funds and private equity. And so they had to build out a lot of new infrastructure for themselves to manage that liquidity. And so it was about a year later that they said, well, we might as well open this up to other families as well, because we know lots of people, lots of wealthy families have the same issues we've had. We're lucky to have all this infrastructure for ourselves, so we'll invite a few others. But even then, it was very much a small circle of friends, and growing slowly and deliberately has been a highly intentional part of the strategy, because there are lots of firms that want to grow fast and take anybody with money. Our view, we've always looked for four things in a client. Number one, and most important, is a great family that's a great culture fit, that people were excited to work with, excited to meet with, delighted to get a phone call from. That's the most important thing. But second, and importantly, is a family with significant wealth, because we are a business and we specialize in families with significant wealth. So we focus on families that are $50 to $500 million of investable assets. Some smaller, some larger, of course, but that's a target. And then we focus on families with significant complexity in their wealth structure, because we have the systems and experience and people and training to handle complex wealth structures. And then fourth, we look for families that are multi-generational families. And you've asked a couple of questions about this already, but multi-generational families are where we have so much experience, and it's where a lot of other advisors don't really want to specialize, because there are lots of services you have to provide there that you can't charge for. So it's a lot easier to be an RIA that just focuses on investments. Doing a lot of family engagement and multi-generational coaching and other things that's a more specialized skill, very hard to charge for it, and most firms just aren't set up to do it.
I like the sound of that. And I think you just described a dream client, and I can relate to that. I've managed money for families for 20 years, and I grew to appreciate the multi-generational client with a family fortune, with a patient, disciplined approach, and you're building something to last. And what I'm hearing is you basically, just like I do, you onboard a family to stay with you forever. Is that how you look at it? You
Absolutely.
take
Yeah.
your time to get to know each other, but if they join, the intention is let's stay on this journey
Yeah. When
for
a
the long run.
family comes on, we're expecting them to stay for 2 to 3 generations at least.
Hmm.
And if you think about that, that's a 75-year kind of decision
Right.
that you're making. Um, so we run the business for the very long term, and we think about investments for the very long term. We think about estate planning for the very long term. I was talking with a client not long ago, and he said, "Andy, do you know why we really love Pitcairn?" And I said, "No, why do you really love Pitcairn?" He said, "Because at most firms, a quarter is 3 months, and at Pitcairn, a quarter is 25 years. And that matches our time frame." And I just thought it was a great way to encapsulate how we think.
Well, it leads up beautifully to my next question. I wanted to ask you how Pitcairn stands out in this ever-evolving world of, investing in family wealth that seems to speed up and have a shorter and shorter attention span. And I think you just got started on that topic, that you take a longer view than most people can consider or maybe even afford to take. Is that how you look at it?
I think in many ways that is true. Now, lots of people consider themselves long-term investors, and then they immediately want hot stock tips and trading ideas. And so then
Yes.
you got to wonder how long-term they really are. Um, uh, it's hard to stay disciplined in markets, and the most successful investors I know are not people who chased hot stocks or got into Nvidia early or got into Facebook early or Amazon early. The most successful investors I know are the ones who have stayed disciplined through market volatility. And it's the number one piece of advice I would have for anybody, any family, any individual investor. Set a plan and be really disciplined in carrying out that plan, especially when it feels wrong. Especially when you see, oh, the market's going down, I better get out. Well, the market's already gone down. So what you need to do now is stay in so you can capture it going back up. And it's incredibly emotionally unsatisfying to watch a market go down and know that you are kind of helpless there. But the most successful investors ride that volatility and then ride it back up. And and the least successful investors hit the panic button or say, oh, we need to change our plan, or we're not doing anything. And I see the market going down. And the best thing you can do is just sit tight. And we are very lucky that we have a very long track record, 100-year track record of demonstrating that discipline and patience through market ups and downs is the best way to go. There are lots of rules of thumb in investing, but there are a few proven facts. And one of the best proven facts is 100% of the time that the US stock market has gone down, 100% of the time it's
Huh?
come back up and gone higher. 100% without fail. So, so it's the one thing you can count on. Now, we can't say it's going to go on forever, but there's no reason to believe it's not going to go on for a long, long time. So the best thing any investor can do when the market goes down is stay patient and stay disciplined. And find a firm. If you're a family or an individual, find a firm that has a demonstrated track record of helping clients stay disciplined through the market's inevitable ups and downs.
I think you beautifully framed it here. On one hand, the fact that as a family or anybody with a substantial capital, wealth, financial wealth, just for a moment, you have to make some decisions. And one big decision is to keep that capital deployed. And the stock market, which I see as ownership of businesses, and you can own them privately and so on, there are ranges of things, but owning businesses over time and capturing the power of compounding over time that you presented, it's key. And I don't want to miss the point that you brought up earlier. The family went through a beautiful transition of owning one single asset, which you highlighted, which a lot of families I meet worked with also experience, and then transitioning to holding a portfolio of businesses. but they have to continue to own something, income producing assets. And you made the last big point for me, which I think is very, very relevant. You need a helping hand, a calm, collected guide. When you get scared out of the market, somebody you can call, and have Andy on the other side of the line who will pick up that call in March of 2020 and walk you through it. And I think
Yeah.
these are the moments where we add this invisible, intangible value that doesn't show up on the balance sheet, doesn't show up on any statement, but that's that one, sometimes 5-minute phone call. That's we stayed invested or we got out. And it makes a huge, huge difference, especially if you continue to repeat the mistake.
Yeah, you're so right. And it's funny in a lot of advisory firms like ours and others, they have a role called financial advisor, which
Mhm.
makes perfect sense. But we don't use that term. In fact, nobody here is a financial advisor. We have relationship managers. And if you think about it, even with wealth, having a great relationship with your wealth, but a great relationship with your family and a great relationship with your advisor is really where you make great decisions. Having those great relationships, having that trust, having that base of knowledge that says, okay, this is okay. And it's okay because I know these facts.
Mhm.
And so walking through on a relationship basis is really where people get the kind of emotional support that they need to make good, disciplined, long-term decisions, which can be hard in any circumstance, and especially when markets are volatile or going down.
I think you and I have taken those calls at different times from various clients, and we know what it's like. And they don't really teach you that at school. I never took a course that
Yeah.
says how to take a call from a client when the market is down. And even the last few weeks, we had some market jitters. And I was putting myself in my client's shoes, and I wrote a quick email to them. And I know they know, but I still wrote a quick email and I said, this is what's going on. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And if you want to call, we can talk more about it. And they know the fact that you build up something that they know what to expect and they trust you through this moment. And if they don't want to just hear your voice, I had clients tell me, I just wanted to hear your voice. And I find that it's really precious because that's what it's all about, right? You can see on the screen where the portfolio is, you can see in the statement in the envelope, but you want to hear the person that's behind it, like a doctor holding your hand when you go in for a surgery. I want you to remember my name. I want you to remember who I am, and I trust you. Then you'll take me through it to the other side, and I'll be just fine. That's all I want.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And there is a natural perception among a lot of people that wealth management and investment advisory is really just about money.
Mm.
And on some level, it's about money. Of course, it is. A lot of money at stake in many cases, but it's really about helping you make great decisions and helping your family make
Mm-hmm.
great decisions for the long term. And I think the more that any advisor can build great relationships, build trust, build discipline and patience into relationships, the better off any family or individual is going to do.
So the world keeps on changing, and I'm curious what you're seeing when you look at family wealth, growth and preservation. What are the challenges and opportunities that this kind of wealth faces? And I think it's a different kind of capital, a family fortune, than probably most of the money out there. Could you share some of the experience, the recent years or the last few decades, and what do you see ahead? What are
Yeah.
people
Well,
thinking about?
yeah. I mean, so one we've talked about is discipline,
Right.
and we've talked about the importance of setting a plan. And so, what should go into that plan? Well, if you're a long-term investor, you've got to be diversified. And the reason you want to be diversified is you don't know what's going to happen 2 or 5 or 10 years down the road. I mean, as we sit here today, around Labor Day 2024, we don't even know who's going to win the U.S. presidential election a few months from now. You don't know what's coming down the pike. And so you've got to be diversified so that you can have multiple sources of return and you can minimize your risk. And then, so once you get diversified, then the second step is really staying diversified. And it's making sure that you're investing in a wide range of assets that have return potential in different market environments. And I can tell you from 100 years of experience here, we've done very well staying diversified and finding some unique asset classes. So, there are plenty of index funds and other things you can go into and do very well. But there can also be unique asset classes in private credit, which is very hot these days, but we've been investing in private credit for probably 40 years. So it could be in BDCs, it could be in lower tranches of CLOs. It could be all kinds of esoteric assets, buying income streams from, whatever, lottery winners or structured settlements or whatever. There's a host of things out there that could be interesting to families. So I think the first thing is be diversified. The second thing, be disciplined and stick with your strategy. I think the third is have good communication with your family members, and this can be hard in some families. There may be certain family members who have great communication with each other, and then some other family members who don't. And I think setting clear expectations with everybody in the family is really important. So that's, governance rules, being very clear about who makes what decisions, being clear about who can be a trustee or who can be part of the family council or who can be on the board of the family enterprise. And then what the expectations of those people are. I think just critically important for sustaining family wealth across generations. And then probably the fourth thing I would say is in any family where you're looking to preserve generational wealth, make sure you're having fun too. People can get very wrapped up in money. You can get wrapped up in decision processes. If you're having fun with each other, you're much more likely to trust each other. And I would say to any parents who are thinking about their children and grandchildren, make sure you're having fun with them. Don't make it all about money. You'll do a lot better as a family if you're having fun than if you're just worried about the wealth.
And what I've heard over the years is to show the right example rather than tell people what to do. I thought that's a very helpful thing to think about. Just show what you would like to see instead of tell kids what to do. I wanted to mention something that really struck me when you were sharing the details earlier, how I look at it as being the least wrong. You were talking about being diversified, you're doing over a long period of time. We don't know what the future looks like. It's uncertain, and it will remain the case. If anything, we know for sure is that future will remain uncertain today and 50 years from now. But I like this idea of being the least wrong. Like when I think of investing, allocating assets and picking a portfolio of stocks, whatever it is, I don't go in saying, Andy, I really want to be right about this. I go the opposite way and I say, Andy, how could I be wrong? And then what can I do with what I can control, be the least wrong with the experience? And I think it completely shifts the mindset, because if you assume that you're going to be right about too many things, life will surprise you.
Yes, right.
But being more on, I don't know if it's a cautious or realistic. I'm an optimist, but I want to be very realistic about what is it that I'm signing up for. I feel like any investment involves risks. That's a certain thing. But what kind of risks and how we can manage them and how we can shape those risks so that we can still deploy capital in a gainful way over a long period of time. And I want to emphasize the element of time, that as a family, you really have time. So you don't have to hit some unimaginable rate of return every year to accomplish your goals. If you have a long multi-decade runway, compounding will take care of it. You don't have to be aiming for some very, very high rate of return. I think that's something that gets lost sometimes in people's expectations. And you emphasize the word expectations. The last thing I want to say, when I talk to clients, I tell them that the capital that I manage, I see it as the money that they don't immediately need. I think it's very important. And with your families, it's kind of obvious that they don't need this money. But it's very important for me to acknowledge that it's also the capital they cannot afford to lose. They cannot replicate it. They can't go around and fly to Europe and pick up a new technology and start a new business tomorrow, mass produce glass or whatever next thing is, right? They can't do it, right? So we have to acknowledge that this money is precious in many, many different ways, and it cannot be replicated. I don't know if you have some thoughts about it, but I like that framework of it might not be possible to make it back. So let's not lose it, first of all.
Yeah. Well, I think you're so right, and uh, every investment, as you said, every investment carries risk. There is
Yes.
no risk-free investment, and so the question is not, oh, there are risks. The question is, how do I mitigate that risk for me,
Mm-hmm.
for myself? And so we think about that a lot, about how we can mitigate risk. We know we're taking it. How big is that risk really? And what can we do to mitigate either, some kind of hedge or just diversifying a portfolio? And then, as you said, let compounding do the work for you. And over time, especially if you just take a single generation as a guide, over that amount of time, you can really do quite well by just staying diversified and letting compounding work for you. I think the second thing kind of related to that is be sure that you are sticking to your values in the process and that you're not chasing things um, or encouraging your kids to chase things. You talked before about the importance of leading by example within a family, and that's just so true. I think about here at Pitcairn, John Pitcairn, grew up dirt poor and just made so much of his life, as did his children and grandchildren, and now great grandchildren and great great grandchildren, and they were very values driven leaders, and
Mm-hmm.
that set a great example for the family office here. So we're a very values driven firm, and it's no secret here. I mean, a lot of it is just the golden rule: treat others as you want to be treated. Be an optimist, but be a realistic optimist. Be curious. Work hard and produce excellent work product. Be self-aware. Very important. Be aware of how you make others feel, and be empathetic. Recognize that not everybody feels like you, and that somebody may have had a really lousy day for a reason that's out of that person's control. I think if you do those things in life, you will live a rich life, a rewarding life, and you'll certainly enjoy multi-generational wealth.
You brought up communication, and I really want to ask about that. Just want to share a quick story from our mutual friend Jay Hughes, and I'm hoping I remember it correctly, but it's very important to use a certain language when you talk about money within a family, and I'm sure you have thoughts about it. And sometimes we take shortcuts and we say things that have a big weight, but they're not helpful. And Jay told me this story how a little kid wanted to buy something, and the parent would say, "We can't afford it." And of course they could afford it, but it's such a shortcut to say we can't afford it. End of the conversation, right? No follow up. And he said to me, instead of saying that, we can say we choose not to buy it. The result is the same, right? We walk away, we
Right.
save the $5, whatever it is. One day it will be $50 million. That moment it's $5, but we choose not to buy it. And it's so empowering because I make a decision in this moment as a 5-year-old that I will not spend the $5, and it will stay with us. I had so many guests on the podcast who can trace back some of their personality, values, principles back to that moment when they were 5 years old with grandma, grandpa, parents, and a conversation happened. That's why when Jay shared that story with me, I thought this is so powerful because so many parents would just say, "We can't afford it." Let's just
Yeah.
say we choose not to buy it. You have some
Yeah.
thoughts, and a bigger question here, communication across generations too, right? Because if that doesn't flow nicely, that's not good. We want it to be an easy and smooth conversation across generations. And as you said, 75-year commitment or 100-year commitment, there will be many people at that table joining us over time as the conversation continues. Can you talk about that from macro picture?
Yeah. Yeah, Jay's got so many great examples from his life and from his books. And yeah, in our family, we take a view like that. We say two things. Is that a good use of time? Is that
Mhm,
a good use of money? And we're
mhm,
not we're not saying can't afford it or don't want to. It's just we're really asking our kids, is that a good use of your time? And is that a
right.
good use of your money? And so the thought process, hopefully, that they start thinking about is to ask those questions. Is this a good use of my time? Is it
Mm.
a good use of money? And I think if you can instill a mindset like that in kids, it becomes a really valuable thing. Now, going back to your earlier point, leading by example can be difficult. We we have a wonderful family we've worked with for a long time, and one of the family members who's a parent now, and he's well, I'm really concerned about raising financially responsible kids, and I want to make sure that they're not wasteful, and so I really don't want them to know how much money we have. I want to keep that quiet so that they develop a little bit of a striver's mindset. And I said, well, that's great. What'd you do last weekend? They're like, oh, we took the private jet to Aspen. Now, there's a bit of a disconnect there between um, wanting kids to think in a frugal mindset while you're taking a private jet to go skiing in Aspen. And so I think the importance of leading by example there is very important. And so that's, coming back to, is that a good use of money? Is it a good use of time? And helping people develop that for themselves, I think is a valuable thing we can all do as parents or as advisors.
No, I think it's a beautiful story. There's a book, The Inheritance Experience, from years ago, and I'm forgetting the author's name. Brumpman, am I right? I think so. And she shares a story how, growing up in any family, especially the affluent family, you think that the whole world works just the way your family does, your immediate circle. And I can relate to that. Growing up, I thought every kid out there lives just like I do. I grew up in Poland in the 80s, a very unique experience. And I realized, no, other kids have had a different experience. It's kind of curious to ask them how they live. But back to your point, you assume that the whole world operates like that. Everybody flies private to Aspen, don't they? And you realize, no, just maybe the people in your circle do. And to be able to see the bigger world out there. Through my experience, I had people share with me stories how at 18, 19, 20, at some point they would decide to go somewhere that was completely different than the world they grew up in, where they volunteered. One person went to the army actually and served. They wanted to have an experience that's so different than the family experience for a couple of reasons. One, to kind of develop their own voice and realize who are they outside of the family. And second is to actually see how other people live. And whether they go to India for 6 months or they go to the army, whatever it is, they realized, oh, there's a wider range of experiences out there. I was just living, like we all do, a tiny sliver of what's out there. And maybe that's not a good proxy. And I should know more. I found it very helpful. I find it very helpful in my own experience to see how other people live. I think it makes us more grateful for certain things and appreciative of what we have. I have to ask you about fears. And I'm curious what your experience has been like when it comes to the biggest fears that the families you care for face.
The two biggest fears by far that we see, one is permanent loss of capital, no surprise there. But I think the bigger one is people fear making a mistake. And that's a shame because we all learn most from mistakes. But I think a lot of people that we work with, a lot of great families and great family leaders, they're uncomfortable with their wealth. And I think for most people, if you say, "Hey, here's $100 million, congratulations," most people would jump for joy, but they don't know what to do with $100 million. You might buy a new house and buy a new car, and now you get $95 million, and you got to figure out what to do with that. And it just it's a mind-boggling problem, and in many cases, people don't know even what questions to ask or where to start, and they're afraid of making a mistake because it loses money, but it could also be embarrassing. And and it's embarrassing on a visible or meaningful scale. And so helping people A, make great decisions, but B, get comfortable with making little mistakes that they can learn from. I think that's very important. You asked about fears. I think, the fear of making those mistakes is something we want to help people work through so that they feel better about the decisions that they make and owning the outcomes.
I love that. I have a couple of thoughts that came to my mind immediately. I don't know if you and I spoke about Brewster's Millions, the book from 100 some years ago. I think we
Yeah.
have. And the reason I'm smiling is because that book, it's a playful story, a novel from 105 years ago, 110, I don't remember exactly, a short book. And it was made into a comedy. I think the movie doesn't give it justice. I think there's much more depth and layers to the book. But basically, it's a story of somebody who receives one small inheritance, has to lose it to get the bigger one. A family conflict, it's being settled with this young man who is experiencing this journey. But anyways, he loses the first part, the first inheritance, and learns a lot through it. And I feel like what I've noticed with families is that sometimes some families, not always, but it happens that they feel like the first inheritance, it's kind of a dress rehearsal. We'll see if this works, we'll see if we can manage, and then maybe another one is coming. But the reality in life is that there's no dress rehearsal. There's just this once in a lifetime opportunity and a challenge at the same time. As you said, you have 100 million, what do you do? And you have to know what you do or have people around you that will help you on that journey right at the beginning. There's no time to learn as you go. And it's a very, very unique experience. And in many ways, I like to say that the family fortune, it's a miracle. It defies the wisdom of the ages, defies the wisdom of the proverbs that we all know, the shirt sleeves in 3 generations. In a way, I think it defies the laws of nature and physics when you really think about it. So it's kind of meant to go away over a generation or two. And it has. That's been our record through humanity. There are books about it, not just the last 100 years, but the last 5,000 years. So all the fortunes are gone. So we're trying to do something that will go up against, history and a lot of, tidal waves. So we're trying to accomplish something really unique. And when I sit down with families that have had wealth for 100 some years, I say, let's pause for a second and appreciate that there's even something for us to talk about in terms of the financial capital, because it's a miracle, right? And again, there's no dress rehearsal. I'm sure you have thoughts about it.
Yeah. Well, 2 things. One is going back to values and leading by example. That's just so important because you're raising the next generation of family decision makers and really the next generation of stewards of that family wealth. But the other thing that we've been very successful with is trusts. And we have a lot of trusts that are meant to go for generations, dynasty trusts that are meant to help family members for many generations to come. And so if you go in with that kind of long-term multi-generational mindset and you put in place vehicles, trusts, to execute that, it sends a powerful message, but it also preserves that wealth for generations to come. And we talk a lot about maintaining your wealth momentum, that when you're creating wealth, you have a lot of momentum. But what happens in most families is you stop the momentum, you get focused on preservation and growth, and it rarely works. You've got to maintain that momentum. And so having trusts in place that can help you maintain that momentum, having values in place that can help future generations maintain that momentum is just hugely valuable. And so I would encourage every family, invest in education, invest in helping family members become their best selves and to be great decision makers, but also don't ignore the power of trusts to help you maintain that wealth momentum across many generations, not just 1 or 2.
I think in a sentence, and I think Jay would agree with us, is that trusts leave room for mistakes.
Right.
And
yeah.
Right? I think that's...
Yeah. Great way to think of it. Yeah.
That's what came to my mind when I'm listening to you, because we will make mistakes, and all of us will. And let's find a tool that will minimize the consequences of those mistakes. I have a million questions for you, but I have one big one to wrap it up. I'm curious about your definition of success. How do you think about it?
Personally?
Yes, professionally, personally, in all levels you want to talk about.
Oh, for me, no question, it's my family, my wife and my two boys. They are wonderful human beings. My wife is just an amazing person, and she's a just a wonderful partner to go through life with, and uh, finding each other and somehow convincing her to marry me and have two wonderful sons. That's success for sure for me, and everything that is good in my life is I think a byproduct of that and the rest of my family, my brothers, my cousins, my parents, my grandparents, and but having a family that I'm just delighted to be around all the time is by far the definition of success for me.
And for a moment, if we could take a leap 100 years forward for Pitcairn, for us to say, oh, this was a success, the century that followed since this conversation, what would the image be like, or what would it feel like?
I think it is that we continue to define the standard for what a family office can and should be. And we've got a lot of wind at our backs on that, and we've set an awesome example so far. I mean, I'm lucky to, almost have inherited a great example, but I want to make sure that we continue to innovate and develop new services and develop new ways of serving clients and creating experiences for families that they just can't do without. Hopefully 100 years from now, people are saying, God, it's just amazing what Pitcairn has done to set the standard in family offices for the last 200 years.
I love the sound of that. And I think you're on the right path and with the right direction. So I have all the faith that you're going to get there and show us all how it's done the next 100 and the following 100 years from now. Andy, this was wonderful. I really appreciate the hour flew by and I learned so much and I'm very grateful for this time. I know you have a busy schedule, but this was such a joy. So thank you so much for today.
Thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Wonderful. You were listening to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest subject of all, money. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question: what it means to live a rich life beyond money. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and follow, subscribe, rate, and share with friends and family. We rely on word of mouth to promote the show. One click for you means the world to us. Thank you. Until next time, your host,